You're listening to Not Your Average CEO Lifeline with your hosts, Danielle Cuomo, CEO, and Nicole Galicchio, L, COO. We are here to provide you with a vital lifeline to executive advice that you've never heard before. We have the resources and the tactics to help you reach the next level. Whether you are just starting out or you've been in business for decades, listen in for exclusive tips and content to meet your needs. All right, welcome back to another episode of Not Your Average CEO Lifeline. Today, we are joined by special guest, Jeff Burch. Jeff, welcome. Today, we are talking about all things strategic storytelling and communications. I am very interested to hear this topic. This is new for us. So can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself, your background, and what we can expect to hear from you today?
Absolutely. It is very cool to be here. Thank you for having me here, Nicole. Thank you, Danielle. And for those just meeting me, my name is Jeff Burch. I am a storyteller and a communication strategist. And I believe that while business runs by the numbers, business is ultimately sustained by people. I am the founder of Greenlight. And at Greenlight, we help business experts and leaders communicate in a way that drives growth in your business and impact in your life. So that's who I am right now. If you were to look me up online, most people look up Jeff Burch and say, oh, well, you're the guy, you spent 20 years in Hollywood working with ABC and NBC and Universal and Disney and Apple. And so that's where you learned about communication and storytelling. And you'd be right. But the fact of the matter is, I started learning about what really drives all this way earlier in my time in Los Angeles. I actually started learning about it when I was 4 years old, and I started classical piano training. And for the next 20 years of my life, I was known as Jeff the Piano Guy, and I got really good at it. And if you're familiar with classical music at all, I really loved Bach and Mozart because they were super clean, super technical. I was a bookworm. I was all about facts and figures and all the logic, and let's just get the notes on the page and play it back. And everyone says, oh, you're playing the notes back on the page. You're doing great. You're an amazing piano player. And I'd smile and think I was amazing. So I got a lot of my reps in with piano on Sunday mornings at church. And there was a day when I was in elementary school that one of the ladies at one of the elder musicians at the church came up to me and said, Jeff, it's all well and good to play what's on the page, but when you get older, you need to learn to play from your soul. And so I was 10 or 11 years old at this point, and I thought that had to be the stupidest thing I'd ever heard in my life. So I ignored her. And later, I started noticing, as I learned more about how to bring music to life on the piano, I noticed that people started responding in a different way. Instead of saying, oh, Jeff, you're such a great piano player, they started saying things like, Jeff, that was the perfect song that I needed to hear this morning. Thank you for that. And every once in a while, people would say, Jeff, the way you played today brought me into an encounter with God. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. And I started realizing that there's something way bigger than just me going on here. And the fact is, because that lady who'd said there's an upper level to all this, she was right. Because there is an upper level to all communication that's available to all of us. I mean, we're all doing the best that we can. We're all playing the notes on the page. And a lot of the times we don't realize that there is an upper level of how to communicate in a way that connects with humans. And when we do that in a powerful way, when we craft a message that connects in a very visceral, psychological, emotional way with another human being, that other person on the receiving end starts to listen, starts to pay attention, and that means they are far more likely to say yes to anything you're asking them to do. And when that happens in business, it means when people are listening and when people are more likely to say yes to your product or your business or your service, it's an incredibly powerful thing. And that allows business to not only survive, but to thrive with keeping people in mind at the same time. It's incredibly powerful.
My brain is just thinking of the numerous ways that you can intertwine this into business, right? There,
Oh
I'm
yeah.
sure there's too many, right? That can be whether it's, sales is what first comes to mind, right? Or customer retention, employee retention. The list goes on. Do you have one specific area that you tell your clients to start with, or you would tell our audience to start with when looking to grow in this area specific to their business?
Well, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. You hit the nail on the head, Nicole, because the thing is, we all are super familiar with story because we are all living a story every moment of our life. A lot of the times, if you sit down and you think about it, you say, well, yeah, I guess I have my own story, but you never really sit down and think we're all living our own story as individuals. In business, then, what happens is one story of one individual intersects with another human's storyline. And the more people, the more stakeholders you start adding into the equation, the more complex it gets. And you start asking, are these stories aligning to each other in terms of who the characters are and what they want? And so in terms of trying to wrap our heads around this, because this is such, if I could just leave one idea in the head of anyone who hears this, I want people to understand that story feels familiar, but it is way bigger and it's way more powerful than we might have given ourselves permission to believe. And it all starts with, what is the definition of what a story is? So I always tell my clients, I always tell them that a story is where a character wants something, overcomes obstacles to get it, and experiences transformation as a result. That is the core definition of what a story is. And I actually found that a lot of people talk about Donald Miller's work in terms of building a story brand. I found some parts of that from an early writing of his, and I added some elements of that with myself. So all of this starts blending together. And when you look at a story this way, you say, this has the very core elements of human communication baked into it. You have identity of the character. Who is the individual or thing, and what do they want? What's the desire? What's keeping them from getting it? What's the obstacle? And what is the change that they want to see happen? And that, when people talk about story, when people talk about marketing, when people talk about sales, the ultimate end of any of it, because it is all the same thing. It is all the same. The ultimate end of all this is we want something to change, either in our life, in our business, in our bank account, in our emotional state, you name it. We're all looking for some kind of a change. So that is what the core definition of a story is. So when you say, what is a story? People usually think, oh, it's this thing. It's this boots on the ground tactic. And it can be. It is absolutely that. You can tell a story well, you can tell it poorly. But what a lot of people don't realize is story is also something that exists on the big picture strategic plane. It's way up 30,000 foot view, because it's driven, all of it, whether at the 30,000 foot view or boots on the ground, it's all driven by those same narrative forces: identity, desire, obstacle, change. And that happens on the big picture and boots on the ground at the same time. I could geek out on this for hours, but I'll stop talking right now. Is there a certain place you want to dig in here?
I think that the best place to start would be, our listeners, we strive to give them action items to take this and try it, right?
Yes.
What would you suggest what piece should they start to try and interject this into their company through their culture, through, where would you suggest take this tip today and try it?
So the number one tip to begin with, before saying where should we apply it, I would encourage people to say, always think of any human communication within the context of this story definition. Who is the character? What do they want? What's getting in their way? And what is the change that is desired? So when we're talking about company culture, for instance, when you start thinking of that, you instantly start thinking, well, company culture, who makes the culture? Well, the culture stems from leadership. Culture shows up in different ways. And a lot of people think that they show up with ping pong tables and free snacks in the kitchen, then they think that's the culture. No, that's the results of the culture. That's a sign of the culture, because the culture is really, this is how we do things here. And so when you start thinking about that, you start thinking about from the context of leadership, saying, who am I leading? What do they want? What's getting in their way? All that kind of thing. I happen to know you ladies have a very strong culture at Virtual Assist USA, just by virtue of the fact that, for instance, in your industry, a lot of virtual assistants live day to day as contractors, but that's not how you've set up your company. Would you be open to discussing that a little bit?
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Support for today's episode comes from Ruby, the #1 client communication solution for growing businesses. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Ruby creates exceptional experiences for your callers and website visitors. They take messages, screen and transfer calls, schedule appointments, perform new client intake, confirm details with outbound calls, and much more. Just like an in-house receptionist, only better. Because they turn every ring into a relationship. It all adds up to more opportunities and more time saved. For more information, visit get.ruby.com/virtualassistusa for up to $150 off your first month of service with Ruby. Imagine you powered by Ruby.
So I'd be curious to know how did that come about? I mean, so there's, the culture of your company is, the company of your culture is very centered on thinking about your people. How did that come to be?
Yeah,
Do you want to take it?
Yeah, sure. So we're going into our 16th year in business now, and that was not always how we did it. We actually started out just using contractors, and Nicole started many, many, many years ago when we were just using contractors. And we made the switch to employees, even though it hasn't been something that has been popular in our industry. But the reason that we've done it is really for our people. It's allowed us to attract better talent, to retain stronger talent. It's been really helpful in that regard.
And I love that. I mean, so because Danielle, you are taking the leadership, you are looking at the people in your company, and you're saying, well, what do virtual assistants want? They want some measure of predictability. They want some kind of a lot of security, that kind of a thing. And so you're able to provide that. And I think that's so cool. And it's because within the context of this greater idea of strategic storytelling, you're already doing it. You've been doing it for years in terms of saying, what do they want? What's getting in their way? Well, okay, well, I'm literally going to build my business and change the direction of my business to say, this is how we're going to do things here, so they can help get so we can help them get what they want, and they can see the change happen in their lives. They can feel more secure. They can feel like this is a company that cares about them as people. All these things. So when we talk about culture, it's something that it all starts with that shift in mindset, and
yeah, absolutely.
It all happens through this concept of strategic storytelling when one is thinking of it within that context.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to just hear your thoughts about, how you can shape a company's culture through the stories and through what we've been talking about. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Sure. So this is where you switch from, if you're talking about the difference of using the telescope, or you're up with a 30,000 foot view, this is where we turn the tables and we come down to the boots on the ground and we talk about the tactical story. Because, I have an 8-year-old son and a 4-year-old daughter. And so if we talk about mission, the mission of our family, or the values of our family, or, that kind of a thing, there is no way my kids are going to be able to latch onto the idea of empathy or equity or fairness or anything like that without having some kind of a specific example attached to it. And that's how we as leaders can actively shape our culture, by telling stories attached to these ideas, because the story, the narrative structure of a tactically delivered story is what engages with the brains of the audience and makes it stick in their hearts and minds.
Yeah, that's terrific. And I like how you tie that into to just how a child's mind works, because that makes a lot of sense.
Well, I mean, and not like I'm seeking to compare people in business with the mind of children, because that's please, I'm hoping no one hears that. It's just,
I don't think so.
In the same way, I mean, just think of any time you've been on the receiving end of a presentation or a pitch, and it's all numbers and it's all it's all bullet point, and you compare that to, here's who we are, here's what we want, here's where we're going, and now here's how we're going to get there. Bullet point. Everyone's on board there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that makes a lot of sense. So what advice do you have for our listeners on that end, and about that communication and why it's so important for them and for their audience?
I would say the number one reason that this is so important is going back to the idea of, if our business is to sustain itself, if our business is to not only survive, but to thrive, it has to do so within the context of people on our team, people, third party, helping the business run, people out in the market who are on the receiving end of our products or services. And so when you think about the importance of communication, it's not only knowing who your audience is and what they want and what's getting in their way and what's the change they want to see. I'd also want to make sure that we consider who we are within this communication context, because a lot of the time it's easy to say, our business is doing this and we're amazing. And it's easy to say that the business or the product or the service that we're doing is the hero of the story, when the fact of the matter is, our clients, our customers, could really, at the end of the day, they can take us or they can leave us. What they really want is to see change for themselves. They are the hero of their own story. And so we are the people coming alongside them as the guide to say, we are here with our business, with our product, with our service, to help you get what you want. And when you start thinking in that way, it changes everything with our communication, because we're coming at it from a completely different place than we might have been coming at it up until then.
It definitely, I hope for our listeners, it is making them think outside of their box, regardless of if they're going to start putting these ideas into play of storytelling and communicating in a way that resonates with whoever you're talking to.
Yeah. I think
it's
go ahead.
It also, you can hear like the wheels are turning in my brain, right? There are so many different, there are so many different avenues, and I want to ask relevant questions that maybe our listeners are thinking, because if I'm thinking about these things, then they're certainly thinking about them.
Well, one of the things that I might suggest is that it's one thing to get the big picture strategic elements in place, but a lot of people, but any strategy ultimately has to be implemented. It has to be implemented through tactics. And a lot of things like this tend to falter when people say, okay, well, how do I tell a story? How do I actually do this? And it's an entirely different set of conversations than we have time for right here, right now. But I will say that there is absolutely a way to tell a tactical story in a way that engages the heart and mind of your audience if you have specific elements in place. And if I could offer this to your audience, there is one URL that I'd like to offer. That is, if you go to storygreenlight.com/notaverage, it's specifically for listeners of this podcast. Go to storygreenlight.com/notaverage. And there you'll find a link to a checklist where you can start collecting some of these elements. Take this big picture strategic idea that's swirling around in one's head and start boiling it down into one specific moment for one audience, for one purpose. And then you can start building this tactical story so you can start delivering it in a strategic and a tactical way to your audience. So if you go to that URL, storygreenlight.com/notaverage, you can get that checklist for yourself and you can get in motion right now.
Listeners, we will have that for you in all of our descriptions so that you can easily click on it. That is wonderful, Jeff. Thank you so much. Can you tell our audience what Not Your Average CEO means to you?
Yeah, I would say, I think we all have an idea of the stereotypical CEO, hard charging, type A, almost certainly male, and may or may not actually care about people, but definitely cares about numbers. And so what I like to think of in terms of not the typical CEO, not your average CEO, is just flipping that idea to say, hey, we believe that the numbers come from the people. And that when we understand who people are, what they want, what's keeping them from getting it, and how we as leaders can come alongside them as guides to help them get what they want, that's what helps them find the changes that they're looking for, and that's ultimately what we're all looking for. And it's an incredibly powerful thing. It's a powerful and empowering process to be part of.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Can you tell our audience where they can find more about you generically, not necessarily the link with all the tactics that you provided?
Sure. Well, and I will say that link does provide a link to my podcast and to that checklist, and also if a way to stay in touch if you want to continue the conversation at that point for working together. Otherwise, you can go to storygreenlight.com, and I love to interact with people and connect with people on LinkedIn too. So that'll be there too.
Thank you, Jeff. It has been very eye-opening, and I hope that we can have you back in season 3 to elaborate further on these tactics, because I know there is just so much information that our audience can absorb. So we hope to see you again next year and hear more from you.
That will be fantastic. Thank you so much. It's a privilege to be here.
Thank you, Jeff. You've been listening to Not Your Average CEO Lifeline with your hosts Danielle Cuomo, CEO, and Nicole Glitchio Els, COO. This podcast has been sponsored by Virtual Assist USA. If you'd like to know more about the hosts or exploring virtual assistant services, visit virtualassistusa.com for more information.